Welcome to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast, where we try to cut through the noise and help you make sense of the chaotic information space around us. I'm Griff.
And I'm Jay McKenzie.
The United States debt ceiling fight heats up as we get closer to the deadline. Another neo-Nazi commits a mass shooting, and for some reason, the right floods the zone over it. And Republican Congressman George Santos finally gets arrested. If you like what you're hearing, please give us a rating and a review on the app that you're listening on. Be sure to subscribe at didnothingwrongpod.com to get our content straight into your inbox. All of our work is free, but we're extremely grateful for paid subscriptions and donations that ensure that we can keep doing this important work. Thank you. The House GOP, led by Speaker Kevin McCarthy, has decided that they're going to turn the periodic debt ceiling fight into another hostage situation. This time, they want lots of spending cuts that might crash the economy in exchange for a promise not to do this again for another year.
I questioned a little bit when we were figuring out topics for this one, if we're out of our purview with a topic like the debt ceiling, because in general, who cares? Or what does that have to do with extremists or propaganda, information warfare, all these things that we talk about? But it does. It's gotten to the point where we're watching in the background, and now we feel like the deadline is approaching, and we have to bring this up because it is a central feature of MAGA, especially MAGA talking points lately. And the center of it is, yes, okay, the country owes money. Some people probably on the right do not think we should owe any money, but whatever, weird fringe minority, we can ignore them for the moment. We owe money. We're going to keep owing money. We're not going to pay it off. Debt is how this economy and the global economy works. Deal with it. But right now, the right and the left are going to argue over how much money we should owe and how much we're willing to pay down the line. It sounds like the most boring thing ever. I know, I get it. Who cares? Move on. I'm not going to get down to every single detail and all the statistics of this fight back and forth because it's not really about the numbers. It's part of an ideological war between Joe Biden and MAGA Republicans, which is a group that now includes Speaker Kevin McCarthy. He bought a ticket and he's taken the ride.
He did. And so there's no confusion here. Let's just real briefly explain what the debt ceiling actually is. I know, boring, but we got to do it. So the New York Times has a great explainer on it that we'll link to in the show notes. But the short version is that the debt ceiling, also called the debt limit, is a cap on the total amount of money that the federal government is authorized to borrow via U.S. Treasury securities such as bills and savings bonds to fulfill its financial obligations. Basically, this is money that's already been spent. The other important thing to understand is that this fight happens literally every time a Democratic president is in office.
But strangely not when it's a Republican president.
Certainly not in recent memory. When Trump was president, the debt ceiling was raised regularly with very little drama. In 2017, 2018, 2019, the debt limit was reset at $20.5 trillion, $22 trillion, and $28.4 trillion, respectively. None of these bills, when signed into law, contained a precondition to cut spending, despite the wishes of some Republicans. Meanwhile, in 2011 and 2013, when Barack Obama was president, GOP House members took the debt ceiling fight nearly up to the point of default both times in order to force the concessions that they wanted. Before that, the debt ceiling was raised routinely without much fuss. However, that all changed in 2010 when the so-called, quote, Tea Party Republicans, unquote, were ascendant. They began to use the debt ceiling like a hostage negotiation, and here we are today.
Yeah, and if you think back on it, guys like Ted Cruz made a name for themselves doing essentially this, refusing to pay our bills or demanding tax cuts. This is when they finally realized that, yeah, we're pretty good as an opposition party and we're going to oppose this thing, even if it's never really been something that was worth talking about or arguing over or fighting about. And it wasn't, because nobody really cared. Like, okay, here's the debt. We're going to increase the debt. Yes, it's an absurdly large number, but look at the size of our economy. We can pay it. Let's do this and move on. But then Republicans decided they're going to make hay about this. And oh my God, look at these numbers. And when you objectively throw out a number like $20 trillion, of course,
Right.
it sounds horrific. It sounds like the end of the country as we know. Oh my God, we owe this much money. And then in 2 years, we're going to owe this much money. And oh, maybe we really need to buy all those guns because, and China owes all of our debt. Well, then they're going to call in that debt and then they're just going to destroy us and they're going to control the world. And you see how the last 10 plus years happened because it started with this thing that nobody really cared about. And then you make it into this huge problem that we have to do something about. Does Obama not care? Does Obama just, maybe this is related to that Kenyan birth certificate that we can't find.
Bunch of tax and spend liberals.
Right. So yes, it is a newish thing, but it worked for them. And the sanity of it all wasn't really part of the equation.
No.
And so it's hard for some people to get their heads around the idea that at this point in 2023, the House GOP really does not care if the economy crashes. Trump just did his disastrous CNN town hall last night. Well, it was a disaster if you value democracy, but it was a huge win if you're CNN's ratings obsessed leadership or a Trump Republican.
Right.
But Trump was asked about the debt ceiling in the town hall, and he endorsed the idea of default. He said that if the Republicans can't get the cuts that they want, then they shouldn't make a deal. He's the leader of the Republican Party. That doesn't say good things about Republicans
but
in
here
the state
we
of
are.
the country. But when he says that, when he puts out the call there, that puts everyone else on notice that we're doing this now. And if you don't fall in line, well, then, hey, maybe things might get uncomfortable for you.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an incredibly unbalanced negotiation because Republicans don't see a bad outcome for them. Now, there might be. The consequences of it's going to be unprecedented.
Uh-huh.
But they are not focusing on the negative. They think they either get the spending cuts they've always wanted, or the economy crashes and things fall apart pretty quickly, and they will blame it all on Joe Biden right in time for the 2024 election.
Hell yes.
Again, it's not really about the spending cuts. It's about enforcing their will on Joe Biden and the Democrats. It's about holding the country hostage, holding a gun to the economy's head and screaming, "Don't think I won't do it. I'll fucking do it."
Mm-hmm.
That's what I hear. That's what I think they're saying to them. Like they get psyched up in the mirror in the morning and it's, "Don't think I won't fucking do it, Joe." And that's where we're at.
It's not about money. It's about sending a message. Seriously.
Yeah.
It's where we are.
Either do what Cat Turd 2 from Twitter wants,
Cat
or
Turd.
the sound fiscal mind of Cat Turd.
That guy.
Yeah. And if you don't, we default and it'll burn and it'll hurt average Americans quite a bit when prices for everything go up and interest rates skyrocket.
But they are yet again convinced they can blame every bit of suffering on Joe Biden. And who's to say they can't convince enough people that that's true? I'd like to think people are smart enough to see through this charade, but even the media is playing along with both sidesing this story. How does the average person supposed to understand what's really going on here? And look, if you want to radically reduce the size of the government, you couldn't ask for a better tool than the debt limit. And make no mistake, the GOP would love to see the size of the government reduced one way or another. This is a long-held strategy for them that they call Starve the Beast. One of the architects of this strategy is a guy named Grover Norquist, who founded a group called Americans for Tax Reform in 1985 at the urging of then-President Reagan. He declared in 2001, quote, "I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub," unquote. Sit with that for a second.
Yeah. And I have to disagree with you just a little bit here because you're right with all of that until recently.
Right.
I think all of that was true until recently. And it's not that it's suddenly untrue. They're just are a few caveats we have to throw in there, because Republicans still mostly claim they want small government. But look at Florida. Look at the policies that made Ron DeSantis popular. He's trying to take over the education system as the governor. He's using the legislature to pass Don't Say Gay and whatever the next iteration of that is, the anti-woke bill. It is all government mandated. It is by definition a big government idea. And he's trying to use the government to win a culture war fight over Disney. And he's talking about boycotting Budweiser. And when does that turn into legislation? Like, it's still kind of early, but they're very interested in using the government and making the parts of the government that help them look good and win the culture war and take down wokeness, or whatever they're calling it this week, and then cutting everything else. So you look at Texas, and Republican Governor Greg Abbott has used power in his state like nobody before him. Yes, he's cut plenty of government programs he doesn't like, such as mental health services, which is, of course, absurd, since every time there's a mass shooting in Texas, he says, this is not a gun problem, it's a mental health problem. But he's not funding mental health services. But he's increased the government power and size of agencies like Border Patrol, the ones that he does like, that he thinks make him look good. He has increased them. So I'm with you on the traditional Republican idea of fiscal conservatism. It's an increasingly absurd position in the context of this Republican Party, but it's still underpinning a lot of the discussion around the debt ceiling. And I think it's the media isn't necessarily up to speed or aware of how much this has shifted.
Definitely. And the media is letting them get away with that. And the one counterpoint I would have is that, like you said, they're all about fiscal conservatism when it's the other guy's policies, when it's the policies they don't like. They're all about, we can't afford mental health care. We can't afford to have school lunches. We can't afford to expand, Medicaid in our states. We can't afford any of this stuff, but we can afford to jack up what we spend on the Border Patrol. We can afford to jack up traditionally Republican priorities, like giving huge tax cuts to corporations to move into our state. We can afford things that we want to afford. We just practice fiscal restraint when it's the other guy. Used to be a little more balanced, but now they're pretty blatant about it.
Yeah. And they're going to do all that while they keep giving tax cuts to corporations and rich people.
Absolutely.
Just don't ask too many questions, because Kevin McCarthy's just worried about how much money we're spending. I mean, have you looked at the number? Trillions. So in this current fight, what options do Biden and the Democrats really have to avoid defaulting on our debt?
Well, I can think of several. The first is negotiate with terrorists or give them what they want. The problem with that is that the cuts they want involve unimportant things like military spending on vets and air traffic controllers, and would more than likely push the economy into recession, which they will then blame on Biden. Plus, as history shows, we will then do this again in a year. Another possible option is to play chicken and let the debt default happen on June 1st when we hit the absolute limit. And that's absolutely a bad idea. It would crash the economy almost immediately, and who gets to blame for that? Biden and the Democrats.
Yeah, and you're right about cutting benefits for veterans, and we know that because the House and Kevin McCarthy keep talking about, well, we already passed a bill. We passed a bill. The Senate won't take it up. Yeah, you passed a bill that even Senate Republicans are looking at and saying, I can't agree to this. I can't vote for this. I won't do it.
That is indeed a bill. You did pass it. Yes, you did.
Yeah. You passed a bill.
Pretty terrible bill, but yes.
Got over the finish line and became Speaker of the House after you essentially had a truce brokered between Steve Bannon and Kevin McCarthy that's brokered by
Tucker Carlson. Yeah.
That's where we're at. How did the House become such a MAGA playground?
Can't imagine.
Tucker Carlson plus Steve Bannon equals...
It's a mess. It's an absolute mess right now. And there's a possibility that the Republicans aren't really willing to follow through with this. And we can see this because the Biden folks have started to kind of increase the pressure a little bit, started to take those swipes of like, well, come on, we got to get this done. What are they actually doing? What's in their package? And the Republicans are going to start getting calls, emails, texts, from people who are going to get hurt, but I'm not sure I would want to bet that the Republicans would blink first, not with guys like Matt Gaetz in charge of this. I think that they kind of mean it this time.
If you look at Steve Bannon, his show right now, I mean, it's just all he's talking about. And now that Tucker's not really putting anything out there, if there's one place to go to for what's the center of the information hub, well, right now it's probably Steve Bannon.
Mm-hmm.
And he's loving it. And he's loving every second of this. And he is going to double down on his double downs. And who has the power to really change his mind or stop him? Or it's not Kevin McCarthy.
Nope. He's one of the most powerful men in American politics right now. That's for sure.
God.
I mean, some of us hope
say it out loud. Ugh.
I know it's gross, but here we are.
I'm not disagreeing, but yeah.
And some of us hope that they would solve this problem in the lame duck session prior to the 2023 session, but they didn't. And as a result, here we are one more time.
So the waiting game continues for a while, but people do need to understand this is real. They may blink, they may give in, and some even on the right think that they will, and this is just for show. Mm-hmm. But they might not.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't look away and assume anything here.
Yeah, and Democrats are possibly going to have to get creative with this one. Everything past this point has never been tried and will almost certainly result in a court challenge that will ultimately be settled by the Supreme Court. And one of the ways out of this situation they're talking about is the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution.
That's right. According to the New York Times, faced with an impasse over raising or suspending the nation's debt limit, some White House officials are looking to a clause in the 14th Amendment to ensure the United States does not default on its debt. The amendment, adopted after the Civil War, conferred citizenship to former slaves and contains a more obscure section on public debt.
The article continues, the 14th Amendment includes a provision that protected public debt held by the federal government and prohibited payment of debt held by the Confederate States. Quote, the validity of the public debt of the United States, authorized by law, including debts incurred for the payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned, unquote, the clause reads. The Biden administration is discussing whether the 14th Amendment compels the government to continue issuing new debt to pay bondholders, along with Social Security recipients, military personnel, and others, even if Congress fails to lift the limit before the so-called X date. So the argument is that, according to the Constitution, the United States has no choice but to pay its debts, and that this clause overrules the debt ceiling, which means that the debt ceiling itself is unconstitutional.
Oh, it's a bold strategy, Cotton.
Indeed it is. Indeed it is.
But at least, hey, it is time to get creative. Mm-hmm. And as far as I can tell, it's not really clear what happens if Biden goes this route.
Nope.
Because Republicans are almost certainly going to fight that in court pretty much immediately. Mm-hmm. And from there, who knows? How long is it going to take? How are they going to be able to uphold it immediately or later on? I'm not a lawyer or a legal expert. I need someone who not even is a lawyer. I need someone who's
We need a constitutional scholar here.
Yeah, definitely not Dershowitz. So, yeah, it could very well make its way to the Supreme Court. And then what? I don't have no faith, but I don't have a lot of faith in the justices these days. So
yeah, we're in some seriously uncharted waters here, and I don't personally presume to know either how it comes out at that point. But what I do know is that the GOP has been doing this for 13 years now, and they're not going to stop. So unless the Democrats take some unprecedented measures to take this tactic off the table, we can just expect more hostage negotiations until the economy just crashes, because that's the goal here. These people have said, going back as far as Reagan, that this is what they want.
Yeah, that brings to mind Reagan's famous quote that I think you all know that I've always felt the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. God, I think honestly that may have been on the wall somewhere in my grandparents' house. I mean, you don't understand. They meant this.
Yeah, no, they were very, very serious about this. This was where a lot of all of this started, and it's that quote from Reagan that just explains so much of what we're looking at right now. Reagan Republicans just didn't believe the government should do much of anything, really. And MAGA Republicans only think the government should do the things that they want. And when they have a tool to try and enforce that, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that right now what they're doing is putting the economy on death ground.
And I think the Democrats have to hold the line. I really do. We don't negotiate with these people because they're not even negotiating. Listen to Biden's press conference the other day, because he's really taking the right approach to this fight, as far as I'm concerned.
Speaker McCarthy said that he asked you numerous times if there was anywhere in the federal budget for cuts, but he did not give an answer. So is there...
I got a specific answer. Got a specific answer again today.
Which is what?
The first, you didn't listen either, so why should I even answer the question? We cut the deficit by $160 billion, B-I-L-L-I-O-N, dollars on the Medicare deal. We cut the deficit by raising the tax on people making 55 corporations that made $40 billion to 15%, and the list goes on. So,
but in terms of what he is proposing, is there any room for negotiation?
what's he proposing? Did he tell you?
Well,
Did you
he
hear
talked
it?
about...
No, I'm not being facetious. Did he tell you what he's proposing?
He was talking about the bill.
Yeah, but what does it propose? Do you know? I'm not being a wise guy. You all are very, very informed people. Do you know what that bill cuts?
There is a long list of things that it cuts. That
No, it doesn't say. It says, does it say what it's going to cut? Or just say generically it's going to cut? You get the problem.
A negotiation implies the other side wants something. You have some leverage. We have some leverage. Let's find a compromise. These people aren't after a compromise. Maybe the traditional methods really do have to go out the window here. And I think Biden has said this. The people around him understand what kind of Republican Party we're dealing with here. And we'll have to keep following this one closely.
Yeah.
Switching gears here, the shooting at an outlet mall in Allen, Texas has so far left 9 dead, including the shooter. At least 3 others remain in critical condition, and another 4 people were hospitalized. 3 of the dead were children, and it's horrific, and it keeps happening. And the right continues to do nothing to stop the next attack, which we all know is coming at this point. And the scenes from this mass shooting were gruesome. I don't recommend looking for them, but you may have stumbled on them on your Twitter feed inadvertently because they were everywhere. I didn't want to see them either.
Right.
But this story kind of took over social media for a while. And the right, of course, right out of the gate, tries to control the narrative and tries to tell us that they know exactly what happened. And as soon as it's a man of Mexican descent who's the shooter, well, I saw several dozen posts about his supposed gang ties.
He's in the Mexican Mafia. He's in MS-13. Look at that tattoo on his hand. Check it out.
The worst one I probably saw was the who does anyone really think the CIA and the Mexican cartels wouldn't collaborate to commit this sort of crime to push their psyops and spread their agenda? And okay, great. Yeah, of course they did this, of course. And then they tried to keep going. Oh, we can't talk about the guns. We'll talk about whatever racist or terrible thing that gets you to avoid having a conversation about, oh, look, it's another mass shooter wearing body armor and using an AR-15, all of which was purchased legally. They are not going to have that conversation. But then everything kind of took a turn because we found out that the shooter apparently held neo-Nazi beliefs, thanks to some open source digging done by Bellingcat's Arik Toller. There was some reporting from the New York Times that mentioned a social media account. He found the shooter's social media account and started sharing the information. And the right collectively lost their minds and found one excuse after another for why they did nothing wrong.
As Toller pointed out on Twitter after he found the shooter's social media account on the Russian site OK.ru, the shooter appears to have been a Tim Pool fan. Surprise, surprise. Now, we're not accusing Tim Pool of being directly responsible for any acts of violence, but you would think, maybe, in a sane world, someone like Tim Pool would look at this connection and say, maybe I ought to reconsider my content or positions, or at least ponder why an alleged neo-Nazi mass shooter got his news from my show.
Yeah, but we do not, in fact, live in sane times. So Tim Pool basically did the opposite of that.
I mean, I got to be honest, like, I think it's funny and I really just don't care. I think we've won so much ground in the culture war that it is completely meaningless that they would even do it, assuming it was a psyop. It means nothing to me. It's just funny.
Yeah.
What a guy. What a mensch, that Tim Pool.
What a piece of shit.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just like, is it? Yeah. Maybe there was no humanity in that man to begin with, but it's a real struggle to find any last ounce of it there. It was most obvious with him because, well, Toller pointed out that the shooter appeared to be a Tim Pool fan, and Tim Pool, I don't care, it wasn't me, and he makes his comments and all this, and just goes about his day, goes about his business, but all over the right. It's a false flag. It's he's Mexican. How could he
possibly
be a neo-Nazi?
Be a neo-Nazi? Couldn't.
Couldn't. The right decided collectively that this guy was one of theirs. They're never going to take a moment to reflect. They don't care.
No.
They don't care. And they either really believe that this is a false flag meant to harm them, or they just say that because they don't care. And we're done. Don't expect humanity to poke through, because it just won't. But this story really, I don't know that it got worse, but it got more absurd when the owner of Twitter, of course, decided to wade in. And as Cheyenne Sardar-Zeta and Mike Wendling wrote for BBC News, the section was titled, "Who's Spreading False Rumors?" And they wrote, despite the clear evidence, several activists and internet personalities, including at least one mentioned in the shooter's post, have attempted to cast doubt on the authenticity of the material. They've claimed without evidence that it's part of a psychological operation, or PSYOP. They've also claimed it's a false flag by the government to smear those on the right or far right. A number of posts spreading the false rumors were viewed millions of times. Among them, one by Twitter chief Elon Musk called the fact the suspect had an account on a Russian platform very odd in another message. And in another message said it was either the weirdest story ever or a very bad psyop. However, OK.ru has an English interface, and its lax content moderation policies mean extreme content is less likely to be taken down. Mr. Musk and Twitter's communications team did not respond to a request for comment. And I just want to interject a little bit here to say that we have seen neo-Nazis and white nationalists on OK.ru and other Russian social media sites going back since we've been looking at this stuff. It's something that they do. They know it's a safe place for them to have accounts and post, and they are not going to get banned. So from time to time, they are on these platforms. You won't have heard about it or noticed, because why would you? But it's not like he's the only person who did this. It's a thing they do.
Exactly. Dylan Roof, the mass shooter in Charleston, South Carolina, had a Russian email address. And it's because they aren't really worried about the content moderation over there. They aren't worried about it showing up in somebody's search, somebody's filter. And it's very common for these guys to have vContact accounts, very common for them to have OK.ru accounts. This is not a thing that should really surprise anyone that isn't really wanting to be surprised, as it were, by this information.
And at this point, the most popular extremist social media platform is Telegram, which is owned by a Russian man who lives in Dubai, but he is Russian. He used to own the Russian version of Facebook until he was forced out or bought out, or there's various stories. But in any case, it is a Russian-owned company. It's not technically based in Russia, but it's the number of users on Telegram really dwarfs any other platform. But the idea that what's he doing on a Russian site? Like, yeah, lots of people do this.
So back to the article, the podcaster Tim Pool, who is a former Occupy Wall Street supporter and Vice News reporter, was among those mentioned several times in the suspect's post. Now, there's no evidence that Garcia was inspired to action by Mr. Pool's podcasts, which tend to cover right-wing talking points and conspiracy theories. But Mr. Pool immediately tried to cast doubt on the veracity of the material, accusing those digging up this material as being part of a, quote, psyop, unquote. Now, Jay, you will be shocked to hear that the BBC reached out for comment, but Tim Pool did not respond to their requests for comment.
So shocked. So shocked. Why? But why would he respond? Because Tim did nothing wrong.
No.
The fake news is trying to frame him again. And it just keeps happening.
Thankfully, he doesn't care.
This time, their defenses of their own behavior, they just went all over the place. And increasingly, they just had to really strain and reach. And you had all of them posting, oh, this is just, it's so odd. And it's Elon Musk's tweet was, this story just keeps getting weirder. That doesn't mean anything. It doesn't, no. He wasn't replying to some news story. He was replying to Ian Miles Chong, the Malaysian man who plays a American right-winger on social media.
Has he ever actually been to the United States? I'm curious.
As far as I know, he has not. And he writes about American culture wars and political stuff for Russia Today.
Wow.
He thinks it's weird that he was using a Russian social media site. It's like, dude,
I'm sure he does. I'm sure he thinks that's quite weird.
I'm sure he does.
Mm-hmm.
And Elon thinks that's really weird. So yeah, it is weird. It is weird. And it's, of course, yeah, the most likely explanation is that this is a false flag psyop between maybe the CIA and the Mexican cartels.
Toads.
And that seems more likely than what is incredibly obvious here. I don't know if Tim Pool or libs of TikTok radicalized the shooter, but do I find it hard to believe that they agreed on a lot of things, that he watched and listened to them because they're on the same page? They adhere or follow the same narratives and look at the world through a similar lens. That doesn't seem like a reach, but no, it can't be that. So
no.
Instead, we're gonna just pull everything out of the sky that we can, and we're going to bend and we're going to twist. And I do wonder, honestly, how many of them pulled something or strained a muscle, because at first it was, this is just some guy who did a shooting, and then he's a gang member, and oh, thank goodness the police acted. And then it comes out that the shooter is Hispanic, and they assume he's an illegal alien. They start posting images of a different guy with the same name, and then another guy that's unrelated, and it gets too confusing to follow, which is kind of the point, but probably Democrats' fault because they love open borders. And if he's Hispanic, well, obviously he's got to be an illegal alien, as if we don't have millions of Hispanic citizens in this country.
And just to bring it back to one other point here, there was a gentleman we talked about a couple episodes back on the program by the name of Jared Wise, who was an FBI agent at one point in charge of counterterrorism and countering violent extremism for the New York office, who was involved in the January 6th protests and insurrection at the Capitol. Well, Jared Wise fit a pattern of a guy who has had some problems. Life hasn't gone exactly right the last few years, started potentially consuming this type of propaganda. Next thing you know, he's in a place like this. And Mauricio Garcia fits that same pattern. This is a guy who washed out of the army. They kicked him out for what sounds like probably mental health reasons. He was working as a security guard. He had a YouTube channel that went back over a year. This is some of the stuff that Eric Toller found. And you could see the descent with this guy into more and more angry and upset. And by the end of it, he's posting videos on YouTube about doing this. He's got playlists about doing this. He's got photos of the mall that he ended up shooting up on his page, his OK.ru page.
Yeah, well, he was trying to catalog the times when the largest number of shoppers would be there. Is that right?
Yes, he was. He was looking at timing and trying to see like when would the most people be there, because it's clear that what the guy wanted was to, as these guys put it, get a high score. And it's another example of somebody at a really dark place in their life getting a hold of this propaganda and just going right down that rabbit hole. And it can happen real fast in some cases.
Yeah, and the right said it was not believable because it was so obvious. And it's, yeah, he posted all of this stuff online and it just happens to line up with all of, he got these Nazi tattoos, and he admitted to having white supremacist beliefs, and he posted all of these memes, and he posted about doing the shooting. And he posted all of this on a Russian site because he knew nothing would happen, and nothing did happen. The account was still sitting there. And because presumably he assumed someone would find it and someone would read it.
And part of the goal for these guys is to have someone find it and read it. They want someone to come along after the fact, be it Arik Toll or be it the New York Times, whoever else, they don't care. They want someone to come along and blow this stuff up because they want everyone to know why they did it. And they hope that some other disturbed individual out there finds this stuff and takes inspiration from it and goes off and does the next one. That's the whole point.
And I think in this case, we had to talk about it. We have to say, hey, this guy is being very explicit in how he got here and what he believes and who he thinks his allies are. And the inability, unwillingness to self-reflect, they can't even just shut up, because shutting up is losing control of the narrative. Yep. I saw Caroline Orr point out on Twitter that Michael Tracy, the Glenn Greenwald's sidekick, let's put it that way, who's gone on Tucker Carlson, R.I.P. that show, but he went on Tucker various times to be the token lefty, I guess, when Glenn was unavailable. But he's also the just ultimate contrarian. And when he's not claiming that all Ukrainians are Nazis because he saw one guy with the Sonorad tattoo. Well, here's this guy who does the shooting in Allen, Texas. And Michael Tracy says, it's really hard to determine what his beliefs were. We need more evidence. We need more context.
He may have been just doing it to shock people. Remember, Charles Manson did it, not because Charles Manson was a Nazi, but because Charles Manson was crazy. That's why he carved that swastika into his forehead. Well, newsflash, Charles Manson was a Nazi. Charles Manson was a white supremacist. Charles Manson started a group with a guy named James Mason, who wrote a publication called Siege that all these guys are huge fans of, called the Universal Order, to start how do we best put these principles out into the world. Charles Manson was absolutely a white supremacist. Michael Tracy.
This is something that we talked about with Harlan Crow and the Clarence Thomas story. People who have Nazi memorabilia and have some, let's say, interesting things to say about Hitler tend to be Nazis, which is why, despite what Harlan Crow says and all of the people who are funded by him that defended his use of this iconography as we have to remember the past, and he can say whatever it is, and I'm not saying he's a Nazi, but in general, the only people that are obsessed with original Hitlers and get Nazi tattoos and carve swastikas into their forehead are Nazis. Yes. There's not a lot of wiggle room there. It's Nazis. And the guy got a tattoo of a swastika, and he talked about becoming a white supremacist, and he posted memes about it, and he admitted it. It's there. He's not doing this ironically. It's not a psyop.
No. This is what they do. There have been so many cases now that are almost exactly like this when you get to the specifics. And the idea that they are starting this, well, he's of Latino heritage, there's no way he can be a Nazi. We'll tell that to Joe Jordan and Nick Fuentes. Here's a couple of other guys who, they're of Latino heritage. No way they can possibly be Nazis, but they've got a track record of content that would say otherwise.
It's a gray area that we don't quite know how to talk about in the United States. But those colonies, the history of Latin America is very much one about the lighter skinned people who were called whites were in charge, and the lowest on the pecking order were the darkest skinned people. And then there were different castes in between that. So to say there is no history of white supremacy in Central and South America is just incorrect. It's not true.
Absolutely incorrect.
Even though we in the United States, at least how we grew up, don't necessarily look at Spaniards or people from Latin America as white, to the people who were there that grew up in these cultures, there were whites. Yeah, it's different and it's hard to wrap your head around. But to think that sort of history, that sort of difference between good and evil based on skin color is something that just didn't exist in the rest of North America and South America is just not true. No, it's not real.
It's not. It's absolutely not. And for these people to pretend otherwise, it really does make you wonder what their agenda is. Like, who are you sticking up for here? The Nazis or your own people? Are you saying that this guy somehow gave Nazis a bad name doing what he did? Are you defending the Nazis? Are you standing for the shooter? I don't understand what point you're trying to make by saying somehow this guy was not representative of a certain thing when he quite clearly was. Why not just admit that this was a really horrible thing and shouldn't happen and move on? Are you that desperate not to give the other side a W? Is that how you see this?
Well, that's not how you own the lids. No. And this is why, again, we do frequently come back to Roger Stone, because his motto of admit nothing, deny everything, launch counterattack is what they do now. It's the game.
Absolutely is. Well, speaking of admitting nothing, a guy who we talked about last year, but not a whole lot since.
Mostly because we were better off ignoring his existence.
But no more. Representative George Santos from New York's 3rd Congressional District has forced our hand. Santos, you may recall, is of course the Congressional Medal of Honor winning author of multiple Pulitzer Prize-winning novels which cover the harrowing personal story of his attempts to rid Gotham City of the Joker and the rest of the evil villains who ran a pedophile ring out of a chain of local pizza joints. Damn. It's quite the fall for the billionaire playboy, but it seems that the deep state has framed an innocent, God-fearing man once again. And he said all that, so it's the truth. Absolutely, and I believe him. God bless America.
Oh, we would not be shocked if Santos claimed all of those things on a resume somewhere. So stay tuned. The Santos leaks are coming. In any case, the real things we know about Santos are bad enough. He confessed to committing check fraud in Brazil all the way back in 2008. Since that check fraud incident, he has just bounced from one claim and scheme to the next. He claimed that he was Jewish. Then we found out he wasn't, and he said he felt Jew-ish. Jew-ish.
With the hyphen.
Emphasis on ish, folks. He made up large parts of his resume. He lied about the date his mom died.
Whoa.
Which he joined a so-called investment firm that was later accused by the SEC of running a Ponzi scheme. I could go on for a while longer, but you get the idea. But we're talking about Santos today because, mercifully, he's officially been indicted.
Let's read from the Eastern District of New York's press release. A 13-count indictment was unsealed today in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of New York, charging George Anthony DeVolder Santos, better known as George Santos, a United States congressman representing the 3rd District of New York, with 7 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of money laundering, 1 count of theft of public funds, and 2 counts of making materially false statements to the House of Representatives. The indictment was returned yesterday under seal by a federal grand jury sitting in central Islip, New York. Santos was arrested this morning and will be arraigned this afternoon before U.S. Magistrate Judge Arlene R. Lindsay at the federal courthouse in Central Islip, New York.
We talked about this last year. George Santos is and always has been a clownish figure. The man has used more aliases than most terrorist or international hitmen, even the kind of absurd ones on TV. He's gone by George Santos, Anthony Santos, Anthony DeVolder, Anthony D, George Anthony DeVolder, George DeVolder, George A.D. Santos, Anthony Zabrowski. That's when he was claiming he was Jewish, not Jewish. And also, finally, George Anthony Santos DeVolder. And I'm probably forgetting some, and those are just the ones that we know about. But hey, Kevin McCarthy needed Santos's vote to become Speaker of the House. He got it. He let the guy get sworn in and seated in Congress. And since then, like we said, we've just ignored him. We did notice that he hired Vish Burra, the gentleman who works at the New York Young Republican Club, which is a anti-democratic, rather fascist-friendly organization. And Santos was endorsed by the NYYRC, and then he hired one of their guys as one of his senior advisors, chief strategist, rat fucking chief, whatever we want to call it.
Fun fact. Do you know that the phrase Vish Burra means surprised donkey in Brazilian Portuguese?
I did not.
Look that up.
I did not know.
You can go look that up. There was a section of Twitter that was having quite a time with that one. Of course, Matthew Turnan had to say something about it. So the Vish-Turnan fight continues because Vish did not like that one bit.
Well, it's part of the MAGA DeSantis troll war, which it's still kind of going, although it's, I mean, honestly, at times it's just sad. Like, Ron, declare. Please, your boys are out there, like, their followers are going down. They're
putting it on the line for you.
Yeah, like, oh yeah, we definitely support DeSantis, and can you please help us with our rent money this week? Because
Bill Mitchell is out there mainlining so much cope, it's not even funny on the course of a regular day. Just, well, how come these polls say this and they said this? All these people are in the tank for Trump.
The numbers changed?
What?
It's actually quite amusing because MAGA is already mocking the rollout. They're already preempting what DeSantis and his people are going to do and how they're going to come out and act like these DeSantis supporters online just suddenly sprung up. Oh, he's declared. Well, yes, I support him. And everybody already knows who these people are. You don't know who these people are. You don't know their names because you don't care. And
thank you. Please don't.
I'm glad, dear listener, that you have a normal life where you probably learned that foreign language. We have not.
We just know little bits here and there, like about Vish Burra meaning like surprised donkey.
That's it. Yeah. So we know who these people are and what they're saying, and MAGA knows who they are too. And they're already saying, oh, they're gonna AstroTurf this rollout and treat it like this organic support that just, oh yeah, we're right wing influencers, and suddenly, this Ron DeSantis guy, I really like what he's got to say. And no, it's all planned. They're already on Team DeSantis. And it's going to just be fake, but they think they're going to get the media coverage. And of course they are, because there's money behind it, and because people are going to play along, and because there are going to be journalists and people who want sources in the DeSantis camp. And so it's going to be this whole thing. But MAGA's already sitting there like, I'm telling you, this is what they're going to do. I'm telling you the date they're going to do it. I'm telling you who it's going to be. Everyone point and laugh at them. And so, yes, in the more traditional media circles, it's going to get reported on. But in the know, on social media, by the influencers that are already vehemently pro-Trump, they're going to win the culture war. They're going to shit post these people into oblivion. And you may not care, and we shouldn't care, and this shouldn't be how politics operates. But for the right, it is absolutely how it operates.
Absolutely.
So they've won before the battle even started.
Yeah, and back to Santos, it's like this guy was brought in to some extent to be a distraction. This guy was just brought in to give people something to talk about other than some of the financial malfeasance. This is a guy who's just going to lie and say almost anything that comes into his head. But it finally caught up to him. And he's going to get his day in court. But if you read through this indictment, whoa, It's pretty bad. The guy did a lot out in the open without really trying to hide it. And the government collected all of this information, and now they're going to use it.
Right. When I look at what's in the indictment, it's pretty clear Santos assumed he was going to lose, and nobody was ever going to really look too hard at his finances or what kind of schemes he was working on out in the open.
Right.
It was just incredibly lazy stuff, like Santos not paying the $138 annual report fee for his company that was registered in Florida. He didn't do anything until he reinstated the company after the New York Times wrote up this profile questioning his resume and then of course everyone heard his name, the story blew up, but he only did something afterwards. And this was not a minor thing, because Santos claimed this company was his main source of income.
Right.
He used this LLC to explain his sudden and inexplicable wealth.
Mm-hmm.
He put this on documents he submitted to the Federal Election Commission, and he couldn't even be bothered to pay $138 to keep the company active. Come on.
Almost like Trump before him, he really did not think he was going to win. And I guess he just sort of forgot about it after a while. And once he finally did pay the fee and tried to legitimize his earnings, it seemed like it was a bit too late.
Yeah, and I'm not going to go too far in the weeds here with this indictment, but it is pretty shocking in its scale. It's also remarkable because, yeah, Santos has pled not guilty and he's refusing to resign. He's called it a witch hunt, and he's trying to fundraise off of it, which is a very MAGA thing to do. And you can pretty much... I would put my money on Kevin McCarthy not telling him to resign either. Mm-hmm. He needs his vote. And if McCarthy was to call for his resignation, it's going to be taken as a betrayal by Bannon and the rest of MAGA. And they will turn on McCarthy in half a second. If they sense even the tiniest bit of disloyalty to their movement, he's dead to them. And look, we knew Santos was a fraud, and now we can see the government thinks his fraud went beyond wild boast and a fake resume, because these are serious financial crimes.
Well, this is why we talked about prioritizing what's important and what isn't going forward. Santos's personal beliefs never meant a whole lot because, to be honest, I doubt the guy believes much of anything about much of anything. He was left in Congress to vote with MAGA and Kevin McCarthy and suck the air out of the room. He's a lot like MTG or Lauren Boebert. These people say and do ridiculous things, so you'll respond to the ridiculous things. They want you to hate them. They want you to accuse them of all manner of moral failings. These people are professional wrestling heels for the most part. But what they don't want you to do is stop talking about them.
And now George Santos is going to be talked about for a while, but for all the wrong reasons as far as he's concerned. And if the charges do ultimately stick and he's convicted, then he's going away for a while. And then, again, mercifully, we can start forgetting that he ever existed.
Thank God. Thanks for listening to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast. If you want to hear more, you can go to didnothingwrongpod.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at James, the word 4, and the letter M, all one word, and Grizza BJJ, Grza BJJ, as well as DNW Pod. Thanks again for tuning in, and remember, everyone mentioned did nothing wrong.